So I thought we'd just start out with the Seahawks, since that's kind of like what is kind of getting attention recently. And I know there was an ESPN kind of feature article that you were in that had some quotes from different players about their meditation practice and things you're doing. But I thought it might be nice just to kind of share. And you said some of that stuff was somewhat accurate, some of it was kind of less accurate. But I thought it'd be nice just to start out with how you got brought into that organization,
Sure.
what Coach Carroll kind of asked you to do, or what you think your job is, and what some of the offerings that you have been kind of working with players and what potential impact they've had.
Okay, that's a lot.
Okay. And there are 49ers here, but it's also a compassion conference, so I don't think there'll be any protesters or too much going on, so I think you're safe.
Good. All right, so maybe I can start with a story. I started off in pro sports early on in my career, and it wasn't rewarding. Like who's this guy doing mental training, or who's this guy that's offering sports psychology services? And there wasn't the organic fit, and I didn't know at the time if it was part of the culture, if it was part of the larger landscape about sports, but it didn't fit.
You weren't being well received in the places you were going.
Yeah. And maybe I can tell a quick story about that. Is that so? There's politics in sport, just like business, and the GM and I had made a connection, and he brought me in. The general manager, and he had brought me in, and he had said. He introduced me to the coach, and the coach, I didn't have enough of a relationship with the coach, and I was kind of stepping on his territory. So this is my first introduction to pro sports, and he is in professional hockey, and he sends the guys out skating, and their heart rate's up, and they're a little agitated, and then he brings them into the room that he was introducing me in, and he says, all right, guys, if you're effed up in the head, go see this guy.
Wow. Wow.
Welcome to pro sports. So fast forward 15 years later as we get into the Seahawks, and Coach Pete Carroll, we had a dinner. And at the end of the dinner, the conversation was, it felt like we were sharing a brain. We were sharing, like the language was in sync, the ideas were in sync, this balance between technology and modern understandings, grounded in rich science, with the traditions from the ancient wisdoms. And it was really refreshing. And at the end of that, he said, what do you say we build a masterpiece together? That's
and he was the Seahawks coach at
That's
the
a
time.
football coach, right? What do you say we build a masterpiece together? And it's almost, at that moment, I was just compelled to lean into that and say, okay, let's see what's here.
Yeah.
And that's how the relationship began.
Wow. And so when he said, let's build a masterpiece together, he was implying, let's see what we can do and build a Seahawks team that was...
Yeah, and yes. And if we unpack this idea of a masterpiece, there's something beautiful about it. It's about the energy and the attention to detail that goes into an expression. And what a masterpiece ends up looking like in sports is, there's a phrase that Coach Carroll uses, which is one heartbeat. Can we gather 53 men and 22 coaches and bring them around to where we have one heartbeat? And there's enough people in the organization that are working to be their very best on a regular basis and relentlessly providing the opportunities for them to compete. And I want to put an asterisk next to that word, compete to be their very best every day on a relentless engagement. And this word competition is really important to honor, because most people, if we went into your technology and pulled out your phone, competition, the modern idea of this is that we're trying to dominate, we're trying to be better than, we're trying to compete over another person. And the way that he and I are understanding competition is more akin to the origin of the word, which is to strive together. So striving together with the people across the line, striving together with people on our own team, to embrace this culture that would allow people to express and be what they feel they're called to do, and to be switched on on a consistent level.
Right. So the driver is to win, in part, but to also be the very best that they can be.
Yeah, we don't talk about winning. And we don't talk about winning at all. We talk about being engaged at a really rich level to figure out and to explore what's possible in your own life. And if you get enough people resonating in an organization, the after effect is winning. It just happens.
Yeah.
And we're not tied, in this type of conversation, we're not tied to being defined by a win or a loss, but we're defined by the way it feels to be us. And then when other people feel us, that's how one of the ways we're measuring success.
Okay.
And not to be naive, like in professional sports and in business, we have to win, right? We have to sell. We have to be able to cross something over a finish line to be able to stay sustainable. So I don't want to be naive about that, but the primary focus is about being resonating in a personal way.
So what were some of the things that got implemented? In the ESPN article, they had a quote from the quarterback saying he met with you weekly and did visualizations and practiced different elements. What kind of practical on a day-to-day basis have you been involved? Was it more like whoever wants to work with you can work with you? Or are there more like open sessions where people could come and learn meditation if they wanted to? Or was there more of a larger cultural focus?
That's a great question. Again, a big question.
All of them.
All of them. The essence of it is that the culture is really what drives. There's a fertileness in the culture to explore and to compete to be your best. And in what ways can the culture and the people in the culture support that? So that the first thing, it all starts with Coach Carroll. It all starts with the tone that he sets. And what that means is that it starts with the leader from the top down.
Yeah.
And those that have a philosophy and approach about how. And when that is asking people to be mindful of themselves, it creates a way that allows people to explore. And so the way that practically it looks is that working intently with coaches, because coaches, like executives, are able to touch managers, which are the athletes, right? So working at different levels. And so working with coaches on strategies and ways to think about how they're communicating and how they're challenging their athletes. And then working with athletes in a semi-group or individual basis. That's, it's really a bespoke process where it's understanding and working in a conversation to understand what's possible for a person. So we start there. What is possible? Right? If everything was connected for you and what are you really working on? What's possible? And then we have that conversation, and then we try to calibrate together to find, okay, that's it. That's what's possible for you this year. Wow, that's electric. That's okay. So then from there, what are the strategies that we can create? Physical, mental, technical, nutritional, using technology. What are the strategies that we could create for you to achieve that?
Great. So if I come to you and I'm like, you know what, I'm playing like shit. I'm a quarterback, and I try to throw it to the receiver, but for some reason it just doesn't go there. My mental game is like just off. You're supposed to help me. I want to be in the zone. I want to be like right optimum. I know I can hit the receiver. I do it in practice. I don't do it in the game. Help me out here.
Okay. The framework is to understand what are the natural talents and skills that you're working on. So we come back to what is in your control. And it's a central part of the conversation, which is let's be really clear with what is in your control, and let's invest in that. So whether the ball is caught or not is actually not in your control. Let's come back to the way that, let's first articulate what it feels like and what it sounds like inside of you when you're at your best. Okay. And so let's start from that place. Okay. And then what we do from that point is we figure out ways to get you closer to that. And we don't talk about winning, and we don't talk about getting into the zone. Okay. Right? Those are after effects. Those are things that happen almost accidentally. There's a purpose. That's what we're driving toward, this no-mind experience. But we don't talk about it because then it becomes an object within itself.
Gotcha.
And so what do is what's getting in the way of you being in an ideal mindset, if you will? And so we talk about what's getting in the way and strategies to work through that. And there's something I think really important to learn from athletes, but there's a lot to learn, I believe, is that they're openly engaging in situations that allow them to be vulnerable and to be critiqued and to be exposed and to be physically harmed and mentally in a dangerous situation. And they're really in the place where they're going for it. And that's a really important part of this process.
Yeah.
Because if you're not able to handle the intensity of a moment with all of that happening, then they come up wanting. They come up with something that is painful, right? Because they haven't been able to be themselves in a moment that has intensity.
Right.
And I think there's a lot to learn from that.
And teaching then how to maintain a certain level of mindfulness within intensity.
Yeah, so I mean, that's essentially what it is, right? Is that for me, a part of mindfulness involves awareness, and awareness of how I'm doing within myself, aware how I'm engaging with my environment, and kind of that interplay between the two. I hope that's right. Because, and because of that engagement, that's what we're searching for, is a high level of engagement.
Yeah.
And when that happens and their technical skills are precise, they can be in a moment that most people define as being intense, and they've dissolved the intensity in that moment.
Yeah.
So we talk about performing under pressure, but it's actually what we're working towards doing is dissolving the pressure. And when we're fully present and engaged, there is no pressure. It just
it's the moment.
It's the moment, right?
Yeah.
And it's not more complicated than that. Yeah.
So, across the nation, like almost every high school football game, basketball game, junior high, whatever, somebody messes up. You hear the coach from the side. And if they don't say, "You idiot," they're thinking, "You idiot." And they're looking at the player like, what were you thinking? My kid plays basketball in Boys and Girls Club, and even then you can see this intensity, this attachment, right? Of like all these emotions with the parents and the feeling, and you just want to lay blame, to a player. How do you feel like there's a way of motivating and engaging? Because almost every game, nobody's going to play their best every game. And so it's constantly like some level of failure or some level of the ball came and I missed it. And I'm curious what you would say to coaches out there, what you feel like is the best approach when there has been an error or a mistake or something that didn't happen the way it should happen. And I think traditionally, there's a very strong arm that comes down in sports leagues across the country, right, at all levels.
Yeah, it's intense. And, there's an old phrase that sport builds character, and it actually builds characters. And yeah, so, it can be beautiful. There's probably 3 to 5 seconds where you have a moment to exchange with somebody after they've felt their own disappointment or they felt their celebration in a moment. And that time is really important in shaping a person, how they relate to you and how they relate to themselves. So we talk about that moment, but if we take a step back and open it up a bit, really, the question to coaches is, do you think that the game can be played perfectly? And most say, no. Do you think that mistakes are going to happen? And they'd say, yeah, mistakes are going to happen. So let's build a skill set that allows for a mistake to happen and the most expedient and the fastest recovery that you can imagine. What would that look like?
Yeah.
And then so we talk about how quickly we can recover from mistakes, because they're going to happen. And what that is, it's embracing this idea of failing fast, right? And in some of the environments I've been part of, there is not a luxury for a mistake, actually. The really high stakes environments, working with people in the action sports world, where if they make a mistake, there's likely peril. Like, not to be too dramatic, but there's real danger involved. And so it's just part of that process to embrace that Mother Nature sometimes will give you feedback, and coaches will sometimes give you feedback. What are you going to be able to do with that extra information coming in?
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Do you want to talk about the variety of groups you work with? Do you work beyond the Seahawks? There's other kind of classes of athletes?
Yeah, so much of my time is spent in high stakes environments, and traditional stick and ball sports are, there's intensity in those moments, and the high stakes engagements are typically action sports and or military engagements. And I have such a strong affinity for the military, but my work there has been very brief. And so I've spent a lot of time inside of action sports, which is, people that are surfing 80-foot waves or jumping off of a 40-foot spine in the backcountry on skis, or doing triple backflips on, snowboards. And so that type of space that there is no terrain for them. There's very few coaching. It's an off-terrain experience where the engagement is really real.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're drawn to that.
I'm drawn to that. Yeah.
And you think you're drawn to that because it's the intensity is so strong?
Yeah, I think that it's really important that we understand who we are. And I'm not a marathon runner. Like it doesn't feel organically right for me. But short bursts of activity that are really engaging and require full attention in that way, it feels right.
Yeah.
And people get labeled as thrill junkies or adrenaline junkies. And while there is an importance about the sensation seeking that people experience, it's another way for us to learn about how to be present. Because if you're not present in the proverbial alligator pit, that you'll suffer from it. So while we can become present in quiet moments, sometimes, being able to do it in really intense moments, there's really a lot to learn, and I'm drawn to that myself. Yeah.
And where's the place of I don't mean this necessarily negatively, but where's the place of strong self-image or ego? Often in sports, it's you're the man, like you can take them, you can beat them, they suck, we can dominate them, and there's this building up of this.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't know if arrogance is the right word, but it's we have to build this person's confidence that they're the best receiver that ever existed, and there's a certain energy and motivation that brings. And is that something that you feel is actually useful to encourage, or where does that motivation come from if you're not doing that?
Yeah, good question. So what gets people good? So let's start with that. Oftentimes what gets athletes good is that they're a bit obsessive, they're a bit anxious, they work really hard, a little bit of a perfectionist tendency. They get a lot of attention from being good early, so there's this foreclosure of their identity that happens at age 9 to 12 when they're supposed to be building and understanding and exploring their identity. And so because of that, there's a fusion of between what they do and who they are. And if everything is on the line about defining who I am, I'm going to get really good at it.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to not know who I am, but have failure attached to my identity.
Right.
I hope that wasn't a mouthful, but so that's something that gets people really good and potentially can land them on the world stage. But once they get there and they've lost joy because of what I've just laid out, that's where a lot of the intersections I have with people is okay, I'm already on the world stage. I have a hard time believing I'm here. It was a childhood dream, but now I want to be able to be me and understand how to do this and have some freedom inside of it. So the word ego and identity is a highly charged word, and being lost in a moment or being absorbed in a moment and that immersion is so rewarding and so engaging.
Yeah.
We just look to see how we can possibly create more opportunities for it.
Right.
And then the ego dissolves, and then you can actually become this is my experience, that people become so interested in that absorption that by default, we don't have to challenge their ego and say, hey, you can't have an ego anymore. It's hey, maybe there's something else that tell me what it feels like when you're at your best. Would you want to have that experience more often? What is it like to be you when everything's happening in your world that's chaotic? So, we identify it, we work with it, and oftentimes it's what gets in the way of us, all of us.
So if you're supporting the direct experience, that then becomes the momentum that allows for the or whatever shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And if you try and fight their desire for fame or fight their desire to be the best, whatever, you're probably not gonna be very well received.
It's a really good question. Is that you see athletes afterwards have a big moment, and some will thank God, and some will pound their chest, and some are really know that if I do that often, I'll get a big watch or a big car. So there's motivations for all of us that we have, and it's understanding where those motivations are and are they sustainable, and how do you want to move forward? And just getting some clarity around that.
And so I know that you not only work in sports, but you're also involved in applying this in other domains, including business. Can you
Yep.
say a little bit more about kind of how you see what some of the lessons are from the work with the sports teams actually apply? I don't think we have too many NBA or NFL athletes in the room, although we probably have those interested.
Yeah.
But what are some of the pieces that we can take from your work within that domain into maybe more,
Yep.
let's say, normal, less intense daily life?
Yeah, I think that our business life is intense, right? But there's more freedom oftentimes for most of the working day for mistakes. A big pitch, like there's a sharpness that needs to happen there, and creating an environment that supports ideas and supports mistakes and failure, like all of that, there's lots to learn from it. But what we've created, Coach Carroll and I have partnered up on kind of the behind the scenes, pull back the curtain, what's the organizational structure that's allowed success to take place at the Seahawks and in his college years. And so that's where he has paid much of his attention. And then I've paid much of my attention in my career on individual change. And so bringing those two together, and there's a transformational process that we're engaging with organizations to be coached.
Right.
And not life coached, but be coached on how an organization can work and how we can create the very specific skills, psychological skills within people to resonate at a higher level. And so,
Right.
yeah.
And is a lot of what comes from that based on just assessing and having a conversation with the people and their needs? Or are there a few things that you can say, like here's a couple things that we can say pretty much are beneficial to everybody, no matter your work life or no matter your sports life, that's like kind of like elemental pieces?
So yes, there's a few on the organizational side and a few on the individual. So on the organizational side, it's really clear to have a philosophy, have an approach, and be really clear about that approach so that you can move that through your organization. So from the top down, right? And then from the middle levels of the organization, be really clear, what is your philosophy? How do you share that with people that, in the leadership chain up and down and across? And so having a philosophy, having clarity of an approach, and that's very much a mindful activity, to get some clarity about how you do you and how your efforts are best expressed in your life. So that's on the organizational side. And on the individual side, as we're working on, can you create a sense of confidence in any situation? Can you generate a sense of calmness and groundedness in any environment? Can you refocus better in this moment than you've ever been able to do before? And those are three of the foundational skills that we believe are important so that you can really trust and let go. And that trusting and let go is that oft elusive experience, but the necessary piece to be able to be immersed and be here.
Right. And so if there's a person, let's say, who it's not coming down from above, I work at XYZ company.
Yeah.
It would be great if our CEO did this. It's not likely to happen soon.
Right.
I don't feel like I'm that mentally engaged, in my work. I feel like I'm not very clear a lot of the time. I'm not reaching my kind of creative potential. And I'm not sure what to do about that. How would you guide me, or would you guide me in terms of like having a more of a fuller engagement with what I do?
Yeah, so put me right on the spot on this one.
I need help.
Yeah, the intersection would be, are you looking to stay or are you looking to leave? Like that's what I'd want to know first.
Okay.
How
aligned are you with your work?
do you want to stay in this environment? And if so, do you believe that you can be all of you in this environment? And if the answer is yes there, then say, okay, how would we go to work to do that? And we become aware of our thoughts, we become aware of our experiences, we become aware of how we can be better at being us. And then if it's like, I just don't think I can do it, say, okay, so let's start thinking about where that would be, and then let's also make sure that we're not leaving one relationship for the second, and we bring our substandard ways into the second.
I don't think anyone has ever done that here, but I'm sure, I've heard of people doing that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And so when we looked at the Seahawks, there was a couple articles. ABC did something, and ESPN is like, well, here's the secret ingredient of the Seahawks, right? It's like this sports psychologist, mindfulness dude. What do you think is actually kind of, and there's so many uncertains, right, in sports. Like the quarterback gets injured, and all of a sudden the team has much less chance of winning the Super Bowl, right? Just totally random things that we can't control. But there are things that we can kind of lead to more possibility. At what, and this may be kind of a hard question for you to answer, but what are some of the things you saw in how the Seahawks played that led you to believe that some of what you were doing was actually impacting? And what role do you think it played in their kind of performance this year?
Well, I think it begins with the environment and the culture. And because that is where, let's say we have the best practitioner in performance psychology or mindfulness, and they're embedded in a culture where that's turned off every day. So the first thing is that Coach Carroll uses the words of being mindful, being aware, excelling and competing to be your best. I mean, it's in every conversation, every meeting. It's part of the DNA. And that was well before I got there. So that part of it is really important to honor. And then how do we know it's been manifested, or how do we know that it's working, is that people come back and they say, that was fun. And that was great. And every day, it's just as a point of clarity, game 1 in the preseason, which isn't supposed to have a lot of value, we call that a championship game. And so game 4 in the season, which is kind of run of the mill at the beginnings, we call that a championship opportunity. And every game, including the Super Bowl, is a championship opportunity. So creating a way for people to understand that every game has equal value, and then drill that down to every moment has equal value. And so that there's no such, this is my language, not Coach Carroll by any means, which is there's no moment, there's no such thing as a big moment.
Right.
There's another moment.
Right.
And we have an opportunity to meet that moment. And each moment has value in and of itself, right? So this is not new for this group, but to athletes, wait a minute, there's not a defining moment?
Right.
Defining, right?
This
Like the
moment
moment is going to define me, as opposed to, okay, I'm in control of some things and I'm maneuvering how I want to be. And so that as a core, as a cultural piece, has been very important for allowing people to explore who they are.
Gotcha. That's beautiful.
And maybe let me add just one more thing to it. Breathing. This group says, okay, of course that's what we're doing. But allowing people to train and understand how to breathe, and how that impacts decreasing the arousal regulation, decreasing or increasing the parasympathetic activation within us, that really matters for digestion, it matters for being here, it matters for controlling themselves if they've thought a moment is too big. And all of that kind of comes together in a unique way, where there's 53 men and 22 coaches trying to pull together.
Right. And at least in the ESPN article, it said a lot of your work was with the quarterback, which I imagine has to be one of the more stressful jobs and or positions. And was breathing one of the components, or visualization, or what were some of the things you all explored? Was it more of a conversational exploration of like what the tensions were? And
it's all of that. It's all of that, and it always is all of that. When it begins with the questions, which is, what's possible? And so we just open it up that way. What's possible? And that's actually, in and of itself, that question is really challenging for people. Right? Like, what is possible? Because if I say too big, am I being ridiculous? If I stay too small, is that, So we start with that idea, and then we just.
But you're almost letting them guide it, if I hear you right.
Yeah, they're the expert in them. Right? And just here, like, you're an expert in you, and I'm trying to be an expert in me, and we're working this together to try to figure out what would excellent, consistent performance and ways of being, what would that collision look like?
Gotcha. Is there any, and I probably should have asked you this before, but is there anything that any of the players said, or any kind of experience or memorable thing that kind of has stayed with you from one of the games or one of the comments, where you felt like, oh wow, I see how they've integrated it in a way that maybe it's not my language or not my way of seeing it, but it's in their own vernacular or their own orientation?
So yes, there's an athlete that I had a really tough beginning relationship with, and we never synced. And I actually did something that was a bit naively disrespectful. Like, I was just too close to him when we were just meeting, like in the locker room space. And it was a long journey for our relationship to come together, and it was great. And he's one of the most competitive, fiery, amazing competitors you've ever seen, and he's one of the toughest guys on the team. And he comes flying at me on the sideline after a moment that he had. And he's coming at me with all of this force and intensity, and this is a large man, and he's flying at me, and he says, "That's what I'm fucking talking about." Right? And so, like, there's this huge hug, and then all the coaches are like, "Whoa," you know? Yeah, so it was pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. Sorry for that.
No, it's all right. All right, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.